What's up guys, Ghost here, and today I wanted to discuss future vehicles for the upcoming Battlefield title. Now of course what vehicles we will see in the game depends entirely upon what sort of a setting we're going to see and in what era. In one of my recent videos about 5 things DICE really need to get right for this upcoming Battlefield game to draw the player base back in again, one of those things was getting the setting correct, and I think, in my opinion, they really need to go with a modern setting. That's what most of the player base who have stopped playing are asking for, and I can't see Battlefield 5 players being displeased with a modern setting after 2 World War games either. So assuming it is going to be a modern day Battlefield game, what kind of vehicles can we expect to see? Well, history has taught us that DICE have, of course, based all of their vehicles off real-life vehicles, so we only need to look to Wikipedia, essentially, to find out what sort of stuff is in development and where DICE might pull some of their ideas from. One thing I would love to see is actually a return to the way that jets worked in Battlefield 3, having 2 fighter jets that are also capable of dropping munitions on ground targets, rather than a dedicated attack jet and stealth jet. Keep the attack jets for rush mode, where you've got 1 on either team, and then have 2 fighter jets in conquest mode. That way, if you're a fantastic pilot, you can still hold your own against 2 enemy jets. Of course, they will have an advantage, it being a 2v1, but you're not totally screwed the same way you are if you're facing off against a stealth jet pilot of equal skill when you're in the attack jet. Now, for the attack jets, there's really been little improvement in the world since Battlefield 4 came out. The US are still using their main top dog, the Warthog, the A-10 Thunderbolt. Russia are still using the Frogfoot. But when it comes to fighters, there are lots of different jets that they could use that could cover this role. So for Battlefield 3 and 4, they chose the F-18 and the F-35, respectively. But there are so many more aircraft in the US's Air Force. You've got the F-22 Raptor, the F-15, the F-16 Fighting Falcon. Any of those would be super cool to see. Just some new vehicles that we haven't had in a Battlefield game before. Maybe we'll see the J-10 as opposed to the J-20 if the Chinese side make a return. And maybe the Russians will go back to using a MiG over the Su-35. Of course, this all comes down to which factions DICE ultimately decide to go with for the new game. Maybe we'll see China, Russia, and the US, but maybe we'll see modern day Britain. Maybe we'll get a chance to see the Eurofighter Typhoon, or perhaps we'll even see something from the Swedish, French, or Italian Air Force. When it comes to attack helicopters, they pretty much remain the same as attack jets. Not much change. The AH-64, the Apache helicopter, is pretty much the king. And then of course we have the AH-1Z Viper. There are other attack helicopters that exist, but when it comes down to it, at least in real world applications, they all carry very similar armaments. The 30mm cannon that the gunner is in control of, Hellfire rockets, and then usually air-to-air or air-to-ground missiles. Personally, I think the attack helicopters were fantastic in Battlefield 3 and 4, so I would love to see them return just as they are. However, there are some interesting helicopter choices that DICE could go with. For example, the Osprey, the V-22. Now, you may have recognized this vehicle from Battlefield 4. Yes, it was indeed in the game. You might be thinking, where the hell from? Well, it was featured in a couple of campaign missions. It basically came down to drop your team off or collect them, but it was never put into the multiplayer mode. I think this would be a new addition instead of the regular transport helicopters. It can of course do the vertical takeoff and landing as any helicopter can, but it can also angle those rotors to be directing the thrust directly behind the aircraft, so it can go much faster than a regular helicopter. So that might be something that's a little bit different and quite cool. I don't know if they can equip any weaponry as such. I suppose they can't have the iconic chain guns that the transport helicopters can have, but hey, it might be nice to see something new for a change. Then of course we have the Chinook helicopter, another very iconic one, looks pretty different compared to most aircraft, and I've always thought of this as sort of a transport helicopter, but it turns out that one of the variants, the ACH-74A, actually comes equipped with rocket pods and side-mounted weaponry. This was actually featured in Vietnam, the DLC for Bad Company 2, so I wouldn't mind seeing this one come back at all. Another thing I'd really like to see in the new Battlefield are some boats coming back. I thought the attack boats in Battlefield 4 were really cool, They felt good, they felt pretty balanced. Maybe when you had two guys on the back repairing, they were a little bit on the OP side, but overall, I don't think anybody had a major problem with them. You know, another part of modern day warfare is also artillery ships, and whilst there were multiple artillery ships, like for example the one on Parasol Storm, there were never any player controllable ones. Now I know what you're thinking, artillery sounds a bit OP, and indeed, whilst the idea is epic, it sounds like it could be a kill streak or a battle pickup, something you just kind of get 10 kills with and then you ditch it, a bit like the AC-130, and I think that's something that Battlefield players don't want. So if they were to implement that, as cool as it would be, they'd have to do it in the right way. So I know what you guys are thinking, Ghost, what if it isn't a continuation of the Battlefield 4 formula? What if it's not a modern day Battlefield? There was a lot of chatter over the summertime that the next game could be Bad Company 3, and I think that's totally viable. Apparently the source that the leak came from got many things right in the past with Battlefield games that were leaked and then came to be exactly what this guy said, and he's now saying it's going to be Bad Company 3 and it's going to be a launch title for the PlayStation 5. But again, Bad Company is based in a fictitious world, so there's no reason that they couldn't have all of these modern vehicles in that game as well. Now there is a third option, in my opinion, and I think it could be the Vietnam War. I think it's the most unlikely of the three options here. People would love Bad Company 3, they'd love a Battlefield 6 in a modern setting, and some of them would love Vietnam, but some of them would be slightly disappointed. So I think it would be kind of bad marketing by DICE. We've had two Battlefield games based around real wars that happened. Do we really need a third one? In any case though, let's say that happens. The Vietnam War took place in the 60s and 70s, but as we've seen from Bad Company 2's Vietnam DLC, there are plenty of vehicles even available at that time that basically laid the groundwork for most of the modern vehicles that we see today. So they still had the Chinook, they had the Huey Cobra gunship, which was only a smidgen away from being what the Apache helicopter is today. Of course, it didn't have the 30mm cannon with the fancy camera and the flare scope, but it still had the rocket pods and it was still the business. In terms of jets, they had the F-4 Phantom, which was widely used during the Vietnam War, and then for bombers, they had the B-52 Stratofortress. So even if it does turn out to be a Vietnam War based game, any vehicle lovers out there should not be disappointed. But what about you guys? What sort of a setting would you like to see for the upcoming Battlefield game? What sort of vehicles would you like in there? Let me know in the comments down below, guys. Have a nice day, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers.